You are listening to HOA Busted. She treated my car like community property. You have one chance to comply before I escalate. That was the first thing Brenda Gray yelled at me in the visitor parking row of the Reserve at Kingsbridge Homeowners Association, Las Cruces, New Mexico, while she stood next to a tow truck with its amber light spinning and a wheel lift arm already inching toward my rear tire. I work as a barber, and I had just pulled in after a 12-hour shift to check on my grandmother's caregiver. My tire touched the edge of the white line. That was it, not over it. Touching it. Brenda called it encroachment and told me the tow was already authorized. I held up both hands. I am not moving anything until you show me the rule. She smiled and pulled a folded notice from her cardigan pocket. Already printed. Already dated. She slapped a bright orange warning sticker on my windshield before I could say another word. The sticker had no readable text, just a bold shape that screamed violation. Keep talking. I love adding notes, she said, tapping her phone screen like she was writing a novel. I asked her what rule I broke. She pointed at the line and said my tire was encroaching on the fire lane buffer. I looked down. My tire was inside the white line. She said the buffer included a 6-inch zone outside the line, which I had never heard of in my life. I said I need to see that in writing. She said it was in the latest parking addendum, voted on last month. I asked when the addendum was distributed. She said it was posted in the clubhouse. I asked if it was mailed or emailed to residents. She said posting was sufficient under the bylaws. I asked which bylaw. She said she did not have time to educate me on basic compliance, and that if I moved my car she would charge a tow cancellation fee anyway. That was the moment I knew this was not about parking. This was about control and cash. The tow truck driver leaned out his window and asked Brenda if he should hook it. She told him to wait, then turned back to me and said I had 60 seconds to move or pay the cancellation fee, which she claimed was $85. I asked where that fee was listed. She said it was in the tow vendor contract which was approved by the board. I asked when. She said 2 months ago. I asked if residents were notified. She said it was in the minutes which were available on request. I said I was requesting them right now. She laughed and said the office was closed and I could submit a formal records request on Monday. It was Friday night. My grandmother's home health aide was supposed to arrive in 20 minutes, and I was blocking the only guest spot near her unit. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Brenda's face went red. She said recording without consent was illegal in New Mexico. I said New Mexico is a one-party consent state, and I am a party to this conversation. She stepped closer and said if I did not move my car immediately, she would add a harassment complaint to my file. I asked what file. She said the compliance file which tracked every violation and interaction. I asked to see it. She said it was internal and not subject to disclosure unless I was in a formal hearing. I asked how I could be in a hearing for a rule I was never told about. She said ignorance was not an excuse and that the parking addendum was posted on the clubhouse corkboard for 14 days, which exceeded the notice requirement. I moved my car 6 inches to the left, fully inside the line. Brenda told the tow driver to stand down but said the cancellation fee still applied because the tow was authorized before I moved. I said that made no sense. She said the fee was triggered by the dispatch, not the hook. I asked for a receipt. She said the tow company would invoice me directly through the HOA and it would appear on my next assessment. I asked when. She said within 30 days. I asked for the tow company's contact information. She handed me a business card with no website, just a phone number. I took a photo of the card, the sticker on my windshield, Brenda, the tow truck, and the parking line. She said documenting the interaction would not help me and that the board would uphold any decision she made as landscaping committee lead. I asked what landscaping had to do with parking. She said her committee was responsible for curb appeal, which included parking compliance and vehicle appearance standards. I asked if that was in the bylaws. She said it was in the committee charter, which was approved in executive session. I asked when residents could review executive session minutes. She said executive sessions were confidential unless the board voted to release them. I said that sounded like an accountability problem. She said I could raise it at the next board meeting, which was in 6 weeks. I said 6 weeks was too long to wait for a bogus fee. She said if I did not like the timeline, I could hire a lawyer and file a complaint, but that most lawyers charged more than the fee, so it was not worth it. Your paperwork is cute. Mine has a letterhead, she said, patting her cardigan pocket. The tow truck pulled away. Brenda stayed. She walked around my car, taking photos of every angle with her phone. I asked what she was doing. She said documenting pre-existing conditions in case I filed a damage claim. I asked what damage. She said the tow vendor had a policy of photographing all vehicles before dispatch to avoid liability. I asked why she was doing it instead of the driver. She said she was assisting as a committee lead and that her photos would be submitted to the vendor for their records. I watched her crouch near my rear bumper and zoom in on a scuff mark that had been there for months. She stood up and said the vehicle also violated the appearance standards because the bumper scuff exceeded the allowable damage threshold. I asked what threshold. She said any visible damage that detracted from curb appeal was prohibited under the Vehicle Standards Addendum, which was passed at the same meeting as the Parking Addendum. I asked if she was going to fine me for a bumper scuff. She said not yet, but it was documented and would be reviewed at the next committee meeting. She said if the committee determined it was a violation, I would receive a notice and have 14 days to repair it, or face progressive fines starting at $50. I asked what progressive meant. She said the fine doubled every 14 days until compliance or a lien was filed. I said that was insane. She said it was standard enforcement and that every HOA in the city operated the same way. I said I had never heard of a lien for a bumper scuff. She said most people complied before it got that far. She smiled and walked toward the clubhouse, still holding her phone. I stood in the drizzle and stared at the orange sticker on my windshield, a coffee cup clenched in my shaking hand. I went inside my grandmother's unit and told her what happened. She said Brenda had been harassing residents for 2 years and that half the neighborhood was afraid to park anywhere except their own garage. She said the guest parking rules changed every few months, and no one could keep up. I asked if anyone had pushed back. She said one guy tried last year and ended up in small claims court over a guest pass violation. The HOA sued him for unpaid fines and won a default judgment because he missed the hearing date due to a work conflict. She said he moved out 3 months later. I asked if anyone kept records. She said most people just paid the fines to avoid the hassle. I said that was exactly what Brenda was counting on. My grandmother handed me a folder of old HOA notices she had saved, dating back 18 months. I flipped through them. The parking rules had changed 4 times. The fine schedule had changed 3 times. The tow vendor had changed twice. None of the changes were mailed or emailed. All of them were posted on the clubhouse corkboard, which was inside a locked building that required a key fob to access. I spent the weekend reading every document in that folder. I made a timeline. The first parking addendum was posted in March of last year. It banned street parking overnight. The second addendum was posted in June. It required guest passes for all visitor parking and said passes had to be requested 24 hours in advance. The third addendum was posted in October. It added a fire lane buffer zone and prohibited encroachment. The fourth addendum was posted last month. It added the appearance standards and authorized immediate towing for encroachment violations. None of these addendums were voted on at a regular board meeting. All of them were approved in executive session and posted after the fact. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. The bylaws said rule changes required a quorum vote at a noticed board meeting. and that all rule changes had to be distributed to residents within 10 days of passage. None of that had happened. I stared at the violation letter Brenda had handed me and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. The letter referenced the parking addendum by number and date, but the date did not match any board meeting on the public calendar. I checked the meeting minutes on the HOA website. The last posted minutes were from 4 months ago. The minutes from the meeting where the parking addendum was supposedly passed were missing. I submitted a formal records request on Monday morning, asking for all board meeting minutes, executive session authorizations, committee charters, tow vendor contracts, and fine schedules for the past 2 years. The management company replied the same day and said records requests required a $50 processing fee and up to 30 days to fulfill. I paid the fee and started a countdown. Brenda found me in the parking lot on Tuesday morning. She said she heard I had submitted a records request and wanted to know why. I said I was reviewing the HOA's compliance with its own bylaws. She said that sounded like a threat. I said it was transparency. She said the board had nothing to hide and that all actions were properly authorized. I asked why the meeting minutes were missing. She said they were not missing. They were pending approval and would be posted once finalized. I asked how long that took. She said it depended on the secretary's schedule. I asked who the secretary was. She said it was her. I asked when she planned to finalize the missing minutes. She said when she had time, which might be a while because she was busy with committee work. I said that sounded like a conflict of interest. She said I was welcome to run for the board if I did not like how things were managed. I asked when the next election was. She said nominations were closed for this year and the next election was 14 months away. I got in my car and checked my mail. There was an envelope from the HOA. Inside was a new fine notice. $50 for failure to display a current vehicle registration decal. I looked at my windshield. My registration sticker was right there, valid through next April. I took a photo and went back to Brenda. I showed her the sticker. She said the notice was not about the state registration, it was about the HOA parking permit decal, which was required as of last month under the parking addendum. I asked where I was supposed to get the decal. She said decals were available at the clubhouse office during business hours, which were Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to noon. I said I worked during those hours. She said that was not the HOA's problem, and that I had 14 days to obtain and display the decal or face progressive fines. I asked how much the decal cost. She said $25 per vehicle. I asked if that was in the budget. She said it was a cost recovery fee approved by the board. I asked when. She said the same meeting as the parking addendum. I went to the clubhouse on Thursday at 10. The office was locked. A handwritten note on the door said the manager was out sick and office hours were canceled. No makeup date was listed. I took a photo of the note and the locked door. I called the management company and asked when the office would reopen. The receptionist said she did not know and that I should check back next week. I said I had a 14-day deadline to get a decal. She said she would pass the message to the manager. I asked for the manager's direct number. She said the manager did not take calls and all communication had to go through the main office. I asked if I could get the decal by mail. She said no, decals had to be picked up in person to verify vehicle registration and insurance. I asked if I could schedule an appointment outside of office hours. She said the manager did not do appointments. I called a neighbor who had been helping my grandmother with yard work. His name was Tom, and he lived 3 doors down. I asked if he had dealt with Brenda's parking enforcement. He said he had gotten 2 fines in the past 6 months, both for guest parking violations even though his guests had passes displayed. He said he paid the fines because he did not want to fight. I asked if he had any documentation. He said he had the notices and photos of his guests' vehicles with the passes visible. I asked if he would be willing to share them. He said yes, and that he was tired of Brenda running the neighborhood like a personal fiefdom. He came over that night with a folder of notices, photos, and a doorbell video clip from 3 months ago. The video showed Brenda walking through the guest parking row at 2 in the morning with a flashlight, checking windshields. Tom said she did it every week. I added Tom's documents to my timeline. The pattern was clear. Brenda was escalating enforcement every few months, adding new rules and fees without proper board approval, and targeting anyone who questioned her. The tow vendor was in on it. The management company was either complicit or asleep. I started drafting a formal complaint to the board, citing specific bylaw violations and requesting an audit of all parking-related fines and tow fees collected in the past 2 years. I planned to submit it at the next board meeting, which was still 5 weeks away. Then Brenda hit me with escalation step 1. On Friday morning, I found another envelope in my mail. A new fine, $100 for unauthorized vehicle storage. I read the notice 3 times. It said my car had been parked in the same guest spot for more than 72 consecutive hours, which violated the parking addendum's anti-storage provision. I checked my timeline. I had moved my car every single day that week. I had receipts from the gas station, the grocery store, and my barber shop. I took photos of every receipt with timestamps. I went to Brenda's unit and knocked. She opened the door with a smile. "Keep talking, I love adding notes," she said before I could speak. I held up the fine notice and said my car had not been parked for 72 hours. She said the HOA's records showed otherwise. I asked to see the records. She said they were internal and not subject to disclosure. I said that was illegal. She said I was welcome to hire a lawyer. I said I was filing a formal dispute. She said disputes had to be submitted in writing to the management company, and that the dispute process took 60 days, during which the fine remained active and subject to late fees. I filed the dispute that afternoon. The management company replied on Monday and said my dispute was received and assigned a case number, and that I would receive a response within 60 days. The email also said the fine was due in 14 days regardless of the dispute status, and that failure to pay would result in late fees and potential lien filing. I called the management company and asked to speak to the manager. The receptionist said the manager was in a meeting. I said I would hold. She said the manager did not take calls. I said this was an urgent compliance issue. She said I could email the manager directly, but responses were not guaranteed. I asked for the email address. She gave me a generic inbox that auto-replied with the same 60-day timeline. I went back to Tom's doorbell video. I watched Brenda's 2 a.m. parking lot walk frame by frame. She was not just checking windshields. She was taking photos of license plates with her phone. I counted 12 vehicles. I cross-referenced the plates with the guest parking log that Tom had saved from the clubhouse. None of the vehicles in the video were logged as guests. They were all resident vehicles parked in guest spots. Brenda was documenting resident violations to justify her enforcement budget. I saved the video and added it to my evidence file. On Tuesday, my home health aide called and said she could not get into the neighborhood because the gate code had changed and my grandmother was not on the updated access list. I called the management company. The receptionist said gate codes were updated monthly for security reasons and that residents had to reauthorize guest access every 90 days. I asked when that policy started. She said it was implemented last year. I asked why I was not notified. She said notifications were posted in the clubhouse. I asked if I could reauthorize my grandmother's aid over the phone. She said no, it had to be done in writing on the proper form, which was available at the clubhouse office. I said the office was closed. She said I could download the form from the website. I checked the website. The form was not there. I called back and told the receptionist. She said she would email me the form. The email never came. I drove to the clubhouse and found the office still locked. A new handwritten note said office hours were suspended until further notice due to staffing shortages. I took a photo. I called the management company again and demanded to speak to someone with authority. The receptionist transferred me to a voicemail box. I left a message explaining that my grandmother's caregiver could not access the property and that this was a safety issue. No one called back. I drove to the management company's office in person. The lobby receptionist said the property manager for my HOA was working remotely and not available for walk-ins. I said this was an emergency. She said I could leave a written complaint and it would be forwarded. I said I had already sent 3 emails and filed a formal dispute. She said she would escalate it. I asked for a timeline. She said she could not make promises. I went home and called the non-emergency police line. I explained that my grandmother's caregiver was being blocked from accessing the property due to an HOA gate code issue, and asked if there was any recourse. The dispatcher said HOA matters were civil and that I would need to contact a lawyer. I asked if blocking a caregiver could be considered elder endangerment. The dispatcher said possibly, but that I would need to document the situation and file a complaint with Adult Protective Services if I believed there was immediate risk. I said I would document it and thanked her. I took photos of the locked gate, the caregiver's vehicle parked outside, and my grandmother's medical schedule posted on her fridge. I added it all to the evidence file. Then Brenda hit me with escalation step 2. On Wednesday morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm in El Paso. The letter said Brenda Gray, acting as agent for the Reserve at Kingsbridge Homeowners Association, was filing a small claims action against me for unpaid fines and fees totaling $435, plus court costs and attorney fees. The breakdown included the tow cancellation fee, the decal fine, the storage fine, and 3 late fees that I had never been notified of. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from Friday at 9 a.m. in Las Cruces District Court. The letter said failure to appear would result in a default judgment and potential wage garnishment or bank levy. I called the law firm. The receptionist said the attorney was not available and that all communication had to be in writing. I said I was disputing the entire claim and that the fines were illegitimate. She said I could file a written response with the court and serve a copy on their office within 10 days. I asked if the hearing date could be changed. She said the date was set by the court and that I would need to file a motion for continuance, which required good cause. I said I had a hard work deadline that day and could not miss it. She said that was between me and the court. I hung up and called Tom. He said Brenda had done the same thing to the neighbor who moved out last year. He said the neighbor missed the hearing because he was not properly served, and Brenda got a default judgment for $1,200. Tom said the neighbor's credit was ruined and he could not refinance his mortgage. I drafted a written response to the small claims complaint. I cited every bylaw violation, every missing notice, every procedural failure. I attached copies of the timeline, the meeting minutes gap, the records request, the locked office photos, and Tom's doorbell video. I filed the response with the court and mailed a copy to the law firm. The court clerk told me the hearing would proceed as scheduled unless the plaintiff withdrew the claim or the judge granted a continuance. I asked what the chances were of getting a continuance. She said it depended on the judge and that most employment conflicts were not considered good cause. I said I would be there. The next morning, Brenda was waiting in the parking lot when I left for work. She was standing next to the tow truck again, and this time the wheel lift arm was already under my rear axle. A bright orange tire clamp was locked onto my front wheel. I stopped and stared. She smiled. "Keep talking, I love adding notes," she said, holding up her phone. I asked what this was about. She said my vehicle was parked in violation of the 72-hour rule and that the clamp was a pre-tow immobilization device authorized under the parking addendum. I said I had moved my car yesterday. She said the HOA's surveillance log showed otherwise. I asked to see the log. She said it was internal. I asked who maintained the log. She said the tow vendor. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to get even wilder. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the clamp, the tow truck, and Brenda. She said documenting the enforcement action would not change the outcome. I said I was documenting harassment and fraud. She said those were serious accusations and that I should be careful about making defamatory statements. I said truth was a defense. She said we would see what the judge thought. I called the non-emergency police line again. The dispatcher said an officer would be out to take a report. Brenda heard me and said calling the police was a waste of time because the HOA had the right to enforce its rules, and the clamp was legal under state law as long as proper notice was given. I asked where the notice was. She pointed at a small sticker on my driver's side window. The sticker had no readable text, just a phone number and a case number. I had not seen it when I got in the car yesterday. The officer arrived 20 minutes later. I explained the situation and showed him my timeline, my receipts, and the bylaw violations. He looked at the clamp, the tow truck, and Brenda. He asked Brenda for documentation of the violation. She handed him a printed log sheet with my license plate, a timestamp, and a location code. The officer asked if the log was generated by a third party or by the HOA. Brenda said the tow vendor maintained the log as part of their contract. The officer asked to see the contract. Brenda said it was not public. The officer said he could not determine if the clamp was lawful without seeing the underlying authorization. Brenda said the authorization was in the parking addendum which was posted in the clubhouse. The officer asked if I had been provided a copy. I said no. The officer asked Brenda if she could provide a copy. She said the clubhouse was locked and she did not have access. The officer told the tow driver to release the clamp and the wheel lift. The driver looked at Brenda. She said the officer did not have authority to override an HOA enforcement action. The officer said he had authority to prevent an unlawful tow and that without proper documentation, he could not verify the action was lawful. Brenda said she would file a complaint with the police chief. The officer said that was her right. The driver released the clamp and backed off. The officer gave me an incident report number and told me to use it in court. He told Brenda that if she continued to harass me, I could file for a restraining order. She said harassment required a pattern of behavior that caused fear or distress, and that enforcing HOA rules did not meet that standard. The officer said a judge would decide. He left. Brenda stayed. She walked around my car again, taking more photos. I asked what she was doing. She said documenting the condition of the vehicle after the clamp release in case I filed a damage claim. I said there was no damage. She said she was creating a record. She crouched near the front wheel and zoomed in on the tire tread. She stood up and said the tire tread depth appeared to be below the legal minimum and that she would be filing a separate safety violation with the county. I asked if she had a tread gauge. She said visual inspection was sufficient for initial reporting. I said that was absurd. She said I was welcome to dispute it. She walked away. I sat in my car and tried to breathe. My hands were shaking. A coffee cup sat in the cup holder, half empty and cold. I looked at the incident report number on my phone and added it to the evidence file. That night, Tom called. He said another neighbor, Maria, had just received a tow notice for her daughter's car, which was parked in guest parking with a valid pass displayed. Tom said Maria's daughter was a nursing student and could not afford a tow fee. He said Maria was ready to fight but did not know where to start. I told Tom to have Maria take photos of the car, the pass, and the notice, and to bring them to my place. She came over an hour later. Her daughter's pass was clearly visible on the dashboard. The pass had no readable text, just a colored shape and a date. The notice said the pass was expired. Maria pulled up the email confirmation from the management company showing that the pass was valid through the end of the month. I added her documents to the evidence file and told her to file a written dispute immediately. She said she did not know how. I walked her through the process and gave her a copy of my dispute template. I started a neighborhood group chat with Tom, Maria, and 3 other residents who had been targeted by Brenda's enforcement. We compared notes. Every single one of us had been hit with fines or tow threats in the past 6 months. Every single notice referenced rules that were never properly distributed. Every single dispute had been delayed or ignored by the management company. We decided to organize. I drafted a petition demanding an audit of all parking fines, an independent review of the tow vendor contract, and a recall election for the board. We needed 20% of homeowners to sign. We had 2 weeks to collect signatures before the small claims hearing. On Thursday, I went door to door with the petition. Most people were afraid to sign. They said Brenda retaliated against anyone who challenged her. One woman said Brenda had reported her dog for barking and threatened to call animal control. Another man said Brenda had filed a landscaping violation because his grass was a 1/4 inch too long. A third resident said Brenda had blocked his garage sale permit because she did not like the signage. I told them we had strength in numbers and that the board could not retaliate against everyone. By Friday night, we had 32 signatures. We needed 43 total. We kept going. On Saturday morning, I went to a gas station near the neighborhood to fill up before heading to the shop. Brenda was there. She pulled in behind me and blocked my exit. She got out of her car and walked toward my pump. I turned on my phone camera. She said we needed to talk. I said I had nothing to say to her. She said she knew about the petition and that it was a waste of time because the board had the authority to reject recall requests if they determined the petition was retaliatory or lacked merit. I asked where that authority was written. She said it was in the bylaws under discretionary powers. I said I had read the bylaws 3 times and there was no such provision. She said I was misinterpreting the language. I said we would let the judge interpret it. She stepped closer. "Your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead," she said. I said her letterhead did not make her actions legal. She said the law was on her side and that I was going to lose in court, lose the petition, and lose my home if I kept pushing. I said I was not going anywhere. She said we would see. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was my car, parked in the guest spot, taken at an angle that made it look like my tire was over the line. She said this photo was submitted to the tow vendor as evidence of encroachment and that it was time-stamped and geotagged. I said the angle was misleading. She said the vendor accepted it as valid. I said I wanted to see the vendor's validation process. She said that was proprietary. I asked if the vendor was licensed and bonded. She said of course. I asked for the license number. She said it was on file with the management company. I pulled up the state licensing board website on my phone and searched for the tow company name from Brenda's business card. No results. I searched by phone number. No results. I asked Brenda for the company's legal name. She said it was on the business card. I said the card only had a trade name. She said that was sufficient. I said state law required tow companies to operate under a legal business name and display their license number on all vehicles and paperwork. I asked if the tow truck had a license placard. She said she did not know. I said that was a red flag. She said I was grasping at straws. I took a screenshot of the search results and added it to the evidence file. Brenda got back in her car and left. I finished pumping and sat in my car for 10 minutes, reviewing my timeline and adding timestamps for every interaction. The small claims hearing was in 6 days. I spent Sunday preparing my presentation. I printed every document, highlighted every bylaw violation, and organized everything into a binder with tabs. I prepared a 1-page summary for the judge. I practiced my opening statement in front of the mirror. Tom offered to come as a witness. Maria said she would come too. I told them the hearing was public and they were welcome. I also told them to bring their own documentation in case the judge wanted to see a pattern of abuse. On Monday, the management company finally responded to my records request. The email had a PDF attachment. The PDF was 83 pages long. It included board meeting minutes, committee charters, and vendor contracts, but it was heavily redacted. Every fine amount was blacked out. Every vote count was blacked out. Every executive session topic was blacked out. The tow vendor contract was included, but the pricing schedule and license information were redacted. I called the management company and asked why. The receptionist said the redactions were made to protect proprietary information and individual privacy. I said fine amounts and vote counts were not proprietary. She said the HOA's attorney had reviewed the records and determined the redactions were appropriate under state law. I said I was filing a complaint with the state attorney general. She said that was my right. I printed the redacted records and added them to the binder. I also printed the state statute on HOA record disclosure, which said redactions were only allowed for specific categories like social security numbers and bank account details. The statute said fine amounts, vote counts, and vendor pricing were public record. I highlighted the statute and added it to my presentation. Then I found something. On page 47 of the PDF, a single line was missed by the redaction software. It said, "Motion to approve parking enforcement contract with Southwest Mobile Towing, seconded by B. Gray, vote 4-1, passed." The date was 2 months before the first parking addendum was posted. I checked the board roster. Brenda Gray was listed as landscaping committee lead, not a board member. She had no voting authority. The motion was invalid. I went back through the entire PDF line by line. I found 3 more missed redactions. One showed a quorum count of 3 members at a meeting where 5 votes were recorded. One showed an executive session authorization that listed parking fines revenue projection as the topic, which was not a valid executive session purpose under the bylaws. One showed a payment to Southwest Mobile Towing for consultation and setup services dated before the contract was approved. I printed every page and highlighted every missed line. I added them to the evidence file. This was my trump card. I was not going to show it to Brenda or the management company before the hearing. I was going to hand it to the judge and let the records speak for themselves. On Tuesday, Brenda showed up at my barbershop. I was in the middle of a cut. She walked in and said she needed to speak to me immediately. I told her I was with a customer and she would have to wait. She said it was urgent. My customer, an older man named Ray, told her to sit down and wait her turn. She said this was not a social call. Ray said he did not care. She sat. I finished the cut and thanked Ray. He left. Brenda stood up and said she was there to offer a settlement. I said I was listening. She said if I dropped the petition and the court dispute, the HOA would waive all outstanding fines and fees and issue a written warning instead of further enforcement. I asked what the warning would say. She said it would state that I had violated parking rules but that the board was exercising leniency due to my lack of prior violations. I said that was not a settlement. That was an admission of guilt for something I did not do. She said it was a compromise. I said I was not interested. She said the offer was good for 24 hours. I said the hearing was in 4 days and I was going to win. She said I was overconfident. I said I had receipts. She left. On Wednesday, I got a call from the management company. The property manager, who had been unreachable for weeks, was suddenly available and wanted to schedule a meeting. I said I was available immediately. She said she meant the next day. I said the hearing was in 3 days and I needed answers now. She said she could do a phone call. I said I wanted it in person and on the record. She agreed. We met at their office on Thursday morning. I brought Tom as a witness. The property manager, a woman named Linda, brought a binder of her own. She said the HOA was willing to settle. I said Brenda already made an offer and I declined. Linda said this was a better offer. She said the HOA would waive all fines, remove all notices from my file, and agree to mediation with a neutral third party to review the parking enforcement process. I asked what mediation meant. She said a third-party facilitator would review the rules, hear complaints, and make non-binding recommendations. I said non-binding was not good enough. She said it was the best the board could do without admitting fault. I said the board was at fault and the records proved it. I pulled out my binder and showed her the missed redactions. I showed her the invalid vote. I showed her the quorum discrepancy. I showed her the unlicensed tow vendor. Linda's face went white. She said she was not aware of these issues and that she would need to consult with the board and the attorney. I said she had 24 hours before the hearing. She said she would try. I left. Tom said that was the most satisfying thing he had ever seen. I said it was not over yet. On Thursday night, I got an email from the law firm representing Brenda. The email said the plaintiff was withdrawing the small claims action without prejudice, and that no further court appearance was required. The email also said the withdrawal was not an admission of liability and that the HOA reserved the right to refile if necessary. I forwarded the email to Tom and Maria. Tom replied with a celebration emoji. Maria said we should still go to the hearing in case the withdrawal was a trick. I agreed. I called the court clerk on Friday morning and confirmed the case was withdrawn. The clerk said the withdrawal was filed late Thursday and that the hearing was officially cancelled. I asked for a copy of the withdrawal filing. She said she would email it. I got the email an hour later. The withdrawal was signed by the attorney, not by Brenda. I saved it. I went to the neighborhood clubhouse at noon. The parking lot was full. A special board meeting had been called. I had not been notified, but the notice was posted on the door. The meeting was open to homeowners. I went inside. The conference room was packed. Brenda was sitting at the head table with 4 other board members. Linda was sitting in the back with a laptop. I took a seat near the front. Tom and Maria were already there. The board president, a man named Robert, called the meeting to order. He said the purpose of the meeting was to address concerns raised by residents regarding parking enforcement and to review the current vendor contract. He said public comment would be allowed after the board discussion. Robert asked Linda to present the management company's findings. Linda stood and pulled up a slide deck on the projector. The first slide said Parking Enforcement Review. The second slide listed the number of fines issued in the past year. The third slide listed the total revenue collected from fines and tow fees. The fourth slide showed a breakdown by violation type. 70% of the fines were for guest parking or decal violations. 20% were for encroachment or appearance issues. 10% were for storage or other. Linda said the numbers showed a significant increase in enforcement activity compared to prior years. She said the management company had identified several procedural concerns, including missing meeting minutes, unclear rule distribution, and vendor licensing gaps. She said the board needed to address these concerns immediately to avoid legal liability. Brenda interrupted. She said the enforcement increase was due to a rise in violations, not a change in procedure. She said the rules were clear and the board had the authority to enforce them. Robert said the concern was not about enforcement, it was about process. He asked Linda to continue. Linda showed the next slide. It was a copy of the invalid vote I had found. She said the vote appeared to be flawed because Brenda was not a board member at the time and should not have been counted. Brenda said she was acting as committee chair and had been granted voting privileges by the board president. Robert said there was no record of that authorization. Brenda said it was verbal. Robert said verbal authorizations were not valid under the bylaws. Brenda's face went red. Linda showed the next slide. It was the tow vendor's business registration. The company was registered as a sole proprietorship under a different name than the one on the business card. The company's towing license had been suspended 6 months ago for multiple consumer complaints. Linda said the HOA's contract with the vendor was void because the vendor was not licensed to operate. She said any fines or fees collected under that contract were potentially invalid and subject to refund. The room erupted. A dozen residents started talking at once. Robert banged the gavel and called for order. He asked Linda if the management company had verified the vendor's license before approving the contract. Linda said no. She said the board had provided the vendor information and the management company had processed the contract without independent verification. Robert asked who on the board had recommended the vendor. Everyone looked at Brenda. Brenda stood up. She said the vendor was referred to her by a colleague and that she had no reason to believe they were unlicensed. She said the contract was approved by the full board and that she was not solely responsible. Robert asked if Brenda had a financial relationship with the vendor. Brenda said no. Robert asked if she had received any compensation or kickbacks. Brenda said the question was offensive. Robert said it was necessary. Brenda sat down and refused to answer. Robert said the board would be conducting a forensic audit of all vendor payments and fine revenue. He said the audit would be completed by an independent firm and the results would be shared with homeowners. He said if the audit revealed financial impropriety, the matter would be referred to law enforcement. Robert opened the floor to public comment. I stood up. I said I had been targeted by Brenda's enforcement for months and that I had documentation of every violation, every notice, and every procedural failure. I said the enforcement was not about safety or compliance, it was about revenue and control. I said Brenda had abused her authority, bypassed the bylaws, and retaliated against residents who questioned her. I said the board needed to hold her accountable. I handed Robert a copy of my evidence binder. He thanked me and said the board would review it. Tom stood up and shared his story. Maria stood up and shared hers. 6 other residents stood up and shared theirs. Every story was the same. Bogus fines, missing notices, threats, retaliation. The room turned on Brenda. Her smug smile vanished when the room turned on her. Robert called for a recess. The board went into a closed session. We waited in the hallway. 30 minutes later, Robert came out and announced that the board had voted to suspend all parking enforcement pending the audit. He said all outstanding fines and fees would be placed on hold and that residents could request refunds for any fines paid in the past year. He said the board was terminating the tow vendor contract immediately and would be issuing an RFP for a new vendor with proper licensing. He also said Brenda Gray had been removed from her committee chair position effective immediately, and that her board candidacy for the next election was being reviewed for eligibility. The room erupted in applause. Brenda walked out without saying a word. I went back to the parking lot. The tow truck was gone. The orange cones were gone. The tire clamp was gone. A neighbor I did not know came up to me and shook my hand. She said she had been afraid to complain about Brenda for 2 years and that watching me fight back had given her courage. She said a dozen residents were planning to run for the board in the next election. I said I would help. Tom and Maria came out and we stood in the parking lot in the light drizzle, laughing and planning the recall petition. We decided to keep collecting signatures even though the enforcement was suspended. We wanted to make sure the board could not backslide. The audit results came back 6 weeks later. The forensic accountant found that Brenda had authorized over $40,000 in parking fines and tow fees in 18 months. The tow vendor had invoiced the HOA for services that were never performed, including staged violation photos and fake dispatch logs. Brenda had signed off on every invoice without board approval. The accountant found email evidence showing that Brenda had negotiated a revenue-sharing agreement with the vendor, where she received a percentage of all fines collected. The agreement was never disclosed to the board or the homeowners. The accountant referred the findings to the district attorney. Brenda was charged with theft and fraud. The case was still pending as of last month. The HOA settled with every resident who had been fined under Brenda's enforcement. I received a refund check for the full amount of the fines plus interest. The settlement also included a written apology from the board and a commitment to reform the enforcement process. The new process required all rule changes to be voted on at public meetings, distributed to residents by mail and email, and posted online. The new tow vendor was required to provide proof of licensing, submit to quarterly audits, and follow a strict escalation process before any vehicle could be towed or clamped. Guest parking was reformed to allow 72-hour passes issued online with no advance notice requirement. The appearance standards were repealed entirely. The board agreed to mediation with a neutral third party to review all HOA policies and recommend changes. The mediator held 3 public sessions where residents could voice concerns. The recommendations included term limits for board members, mandatory training for committee chairs, and an independent ombudsman to handle complaints. The board adopted all of the recommendations. Brenda never returned to the neighborhood. Her house went up for sale 2 months after the charges were filed. A young family bought it. They have 2 kids and a dog. The dog barks sometimes. No one complains. Tom, Maria, and I ran for the board in the next election. All 3 of us won. We have been serving for 8 months now. The neighborhood is quieter. The parking lot is calmer. The enforcement is fair. We still have rules, but they make sense and everyone knows what they are. I still cut hair and hear neighborhood intel from my customers. Most of it is boring now, which is exactly how it should be. I park in the guest spot sometimes when I visit my grandmother. My tire still touches the line. No one cares. The tow truck never comes back. The orange cones stay in storage. The tire clamp is gone. The coffee cup in my hand is warm now, not cold. I stand in the parking lot in the evening drizzle and smile, because I know that keeping records and refusing to back down made all the difference. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.